Welcome back. In the last video we explored how imagery is basically just a straightforward and simple comparison between two objects in order to improve the descriptions in our stories and our articles. And in this video we're going to explore that every single image is made up of two parts. And if you can understand this fundamental aspect of images, then answering questions on imagery becomes easier. And those two parts are known as the original element and what we'll call the introduced element. And this will become clearer as we practice a question in this video. So in one of the examples that we looked at in the last video, the original element was the hang glider. So the person writing wanted to describe a hang glider, and they introduced an eagle. That was the introduced element to help make that description better. So all images in that case can be seen as a comparison. And we're going to use this question here as an example and work our way through it just to see how the different elements work. So the question's at the bottom in the purple box. Explain fully why the metaphor an enormous eagle clutching its human prey in its talons in lines 6 to 8 is effective here, and it's worth 2 marks. So if you want to pause it here, feel free to. You can pause this and read the paragraph yourself, but I'm going to read it out just for those of you who want to hear it. So here goes. The crowd on the beach found their gaze drawn to the sky. At first it was difficult to spot in the harsh glare of the sun, but once you noticed the hang glider, it was impossible to ignore. Defying gravity, its brave pilot expertly manoeuvred the glider in the ever-changing wind. The hang glider flew over the cliffs, an enormous eagle clutching its human prey in its talons. So in this question, the metaphor only appears in the very last sentence, where the hang glider is being compared to an eagle. And we use this formula here for all imagery questions, be it a simile or a metaphor, whatever type of imagery you find in the passage. Use the same formula, and here it is. We write a sentence that includes the two groups of words in purple, just as and so. Straight after the just as, you discuss the introduced element, and then you move to so, and you talk about the original thing that was being described. And again, this is far easier to understand when I show you an example. So we have our boxes that we're using. We're not using our apples anymore. We're using the boxes this time around. All our images now are going to have an original element, the thing that the writer wants to describe. And then the writer introduces a second element. This we're calling the introduced element. And this second element is to make the description of the original element better, to improve the original description. We introduce a second idea. So we're going to use this framework throughout this section on imagery. Let's look at some examples. The hang glider is the original element because in that piece of writing that's what's been described, the view of a hang glider. And the eagle is the introduced element. It's the second thing that gets mentioned. Likewise, we looked at the hot air balloon. That's what the writer wanted to describe in that passage. They wanted you as the reader to get a good idea of the hot air balloon and how it's behaving in your head. So they introduced the light bulb. It wasn't actually part of the original story. It was introduced. It was added later on. And just to clear up something that can be confusing sometimes, it's not about things being real or fake or true and not true. And let me show you this example here. Imagine I have a story and it's a fantasy story, a fantasy novel like The Hobbit or Lord of the Rings, and I had a character who's a dragon. Now, in my story, that dragon is real. Okay, even though we know that dragons don't fly around planet Earth, we don't have dragons in our stories, in the world, be it Middle Earth or whatever other fantasy world you have, those dragons do exist. They're fine to have in your story. Now, to help my reader understand how that dragon moves or behaves, I can introduce a second element, and I can use the same one. I can use the same eagle that we used before to say that the dragon soared high above the village or high above the town like an eagle. And so it's not about the thing existing or not existing. It's about, in the first box is always what is the writer trying to describe, and then the second box is another item, another object that's used to improve that description. So we'll go back to our formula. With our formula, we actually start with the second piece of the jigsaw. We start with the introduced element, whatever was added to improve the description. And then we go back to the original element. So it's just as, introduced element, so the original element. And let's watch that in practice. So we'll go back to this question here that we had. It looked like this. Explain fully why the metaphor an enormous eagle clutching its human prey in its talons is effective here. Well, that metaphor was used as a comparison to describe the hang glider better. And here's a close-up of that eagle. And you can see in its talons, its claws at the back there, it's gripping a fish. So in our sort of comparison, the eagle and its wide, broad wings is like the hang glider, and the fish is like the man that kind of hangs beneath the hang glider and actually pilot and controls the hang glider. Now, in this case, the fish isn't in control. The eagle, is 100% in control of this situation. However, it still works. It's close enough of a comparison to work as a simile. What we see is that the position of the fish dangling below that eagle high in the sky, it's literally a fish out of water. The eagle could drop it at any second. It's precarious. It's risky. It's not a place that anyone would like to be. It's very, very, very dangerous for the fish. Now, the hang glider isn't as dangerous as that. You would expect most hang glider pilots to survive each flight. But that position of hanging below the wing of a hang glider is very like this fish here being held below the eagle. They're similar enough to improve our description. So in our answer, we start with the second. We don't start with the hang glider. This is crucial. You start with what's been introduced. And in our case, the eagle was introduced to improve the description. So we look at the qualities. So the qualities we mentioned were the wings and then the kind of hanging below. So just as an eagle has a large wingspan and its prey, that's the fish, is held below it in a risky and precarious position, so too the pilot of the hang glider looks like he is at risk, dangling below the hang glider's large wings, and looks like he could fall at any moment. So we've actually done two comparisons there. We've compared the wings and we've compared the pilot and the fish. So we've actually done a double comparison of that answer. That's actually a really good answer there. And you would get 1 mark, if I can grab my pen here just to show you, you would get 1 mark for the top section here. Okay, so in a 2-mark question, this is where the first mark is for. And let me change color down here. See if we can get this one. And the second one is for the bottom half. There we go. Ooh, pardon my drawing skills. Now, you get 1 mark for each. So you start just as with the introduced element, in our case the eagle, and you finish the so or so too with what was the original thing that was the writer wanted to describe. So you get 1 mark for each, and that's how you get your 2 marks. Let's look at a second example to help make it clear. In this case, the question says, explain fully why the metaphor hang in the air like a colourful light bulb suspended by an invisible wire is effective here. Now, that's actually a simile, because I'm just going to put a line through that there. I hope some of you spotted it. It's a simile for the simple reason that it uses the word like. Now, I'm trying to write with a mouse here so you can gather it's not very clear. Hang in the air because it's got that word like there. Okay, explain fully why the simile hang in the air like a colourful light bulb suspended by an invisible wire is effective here. So let's look at the passage. As dawn finally penetrated the darkness of a moonless light, the ground crew began inflating the hot air balloon using the powerful gas burners. It lifted slowly into the air, the brightest object in the dim light. As it cleared the tops of the trees, the hot air balloon seemed to hang in the air like a colourful light bulb suspended by an invisible wire. So we go through the same process. Again, we have to identify what are the 2 elements, and then we will use our formula to talk about each of the individual elements one at a time. We'll start with what's new, what's been introduced, and finish with what was originally being described. So let's have a look here. I've changed the picture of the hot air balloon to show one that, like our passage description, is actually the burner is on. You can see that gas burner, that bright light at the bottom of the red part of the balloon. It's inside there. So that's what's being described. That's the original element, is a balloon shortly after takeoff, just as it goes over the heights of the trees. It's dawn. It's in the sort of early morning, so it's not dark, but it's certainly not as bright as a normal day at midday. And the hot air balloon really stands out against that dark background, especially when the light of the gas is going up inside it. And the writer then compares that to what we looked at in the last video, the suspended light bulb. And we can see there's 2 elements to compare. The shape, so a bit like the wings in the last example, the wings of the bird and the wings of the hang glider are similar. The shape of the light bulb and the shape of the hot air balloon are very similar. But also, if you look inside the light bulb, that very thin line, about 3/4 of the way up, that goes from left to right, that's called the filament. And that's actually what glows when you turn on your lights at home and the electricity goes through them. The filament heats up and glows. And that, when it's on, it's not on in this picture, but when a light bulb is on, I think you'd agree, it looks a little bit like a hot air balloon whose gas burner is on. So with our just as and so too, we'll start with the introduced element, we'll start with the light bulb, and we'll finish with the hot air balloon. So here it is on the formula: start with the introduced element, the light bulb, and end on the original element. And it looks a little bit like this. Just as a light bulb has a filament that glows brightly and illuminates the teardrop shape, so too the hot air balloon is illuminated from the inside by the burning gas. The hot air balloon moves so slowly that it appears not to move, like a light bulb hangs in the air. So again, I've given more than one comparison here. I've compared the glowing, the illumination of the filament of the light bulb and the gas burner of the hot air balloon, and I've also compared this idea of very slow movement. This is the opposite of an aircraft, a fast moving object in the air, or a rocket or something like this. This is very graceful, and this one's so slow you can barely see it. So I'm definitely getting my 2 marks there. Again, the first, you can kind of divide up those marks here. If I can find this, everything above that green line gets 1 mark, and everything below it gets the other mark. And this extra sentence, the last sentence, the hot air balloon moves so slowly, that's kind of bonus marks. I would get enough just from what's in that middle section, but because I want to do well on my National 5, I give extra answers wherever I can. So I would get 1 mark for that, I would get 1 mark for that, and almost kind of bonus points in there. And that's sort of the shape of how the answers work. We use just as, so too, just as for what's been introduced to make the description better, and so or so too for the original thing that's being described. So I really recommend keep imagery simple. Keep imagery simple. By that I mean have a look at the 2 different parts that are involved. Every image has to have at least 2 parts. So find where the original object is, what's being described. And it may not be a physical object, it could be an emotion, it could be something that you can't hold in your hand. And find what it's being compared to, the introduced object. Once you've found the 2 objects, decide which one is the original, what did the writer want to describe, and what's the introduced element. What is it that helps to make that description better? Now, you can go over this video as many times as you need. I know imagery is quite complicated to begin with, so I don't expect you to fully understand it by the end of this video. However, if you need to, I've kind of taken the core elements of this video and I've put it into a worksheet here, Imagery Worksheet 1. So you could print that out for yourself or download it, and you've got the idea of the 2 boxes, you've got the imagery formula, and you've got the worked example there. Okay, so that will help kind of keep you right when you go to answer those questions. Always use the formula. Always use the formula. The formula is actually one of the quickest ways. If you don't use the formula, you can kind of end up waffling a little bit, and you can end up writing half a page or more. I've seen really long answers for imagery questions in the past. The formula actually helps you to write it more briefly and more quickly, giving you more time to work on other questions. So that's it. We'll move on in the next video to looking at more examples where I'll give you a chance to try and answer the question yourself before I give you the answers. But just keep that idea of comparison and the formula of just as and so. Keep those 2 things in mind at all times in imagery, and you'll do really well. And I'll see you in the next video.